Welcome to Philly Tech Connect podcast, where Philly's tech minds meet. CEOs, developers, dreamers. This is your space. Each week, we explore the journeys of tech innovators. Join us and be inspired.
Hey everyone, Dave here with another episode of Philly Tech Connect podcast. Today I'm speaking with Jake Stein, co-founder and CEO of Common Paper. Previously, he was the co-founder of RJMetrics, which was acquired by Magento and then Adobe, and also Stitch, which was acquired by Talent before RJMetrics. Jake worked in venture capital and started a landscaping business in high school. He was also the 44th ranked table tennis player under 21 in Jersey, achievements of which he's equally proud. Jake, how are you doing?
I'm great. How are you, Dave?
I'm doing well. Yeah. Table tennis. That's an interesting one. Give us the quick and dirty on that. What's going on?
It's the best sport objectively. And my buddy Ian and I in high school decided that we liked table tennis and we didn't have an opportunity to play, so we started a club so that basically we could raise money and get a table. And we just played every day for years. And I got okay and started playing in tournaments. And I was like, I'm good for a normal person, but like in playing in like legit tournaments, I got destroyed often by people like one time by a fifth grader and another by like a woman who was like 40 years older than me. And so it's a sport where skill matters a lot.
Can you tell me a little bit about the difference between the 44th ranked person and the fourth ranked person? Is it a move set? Is it a stamina? What is it?
It's much more about like the ball control. I think like it's reflexes for sure. I remember like I played on my college team, or it was like a club team, like it wasn't like a varsity thing. But there were a couple people there where like my specialty was serving. I'm like, that's like the thing that I'm best at. And the like top two or three guys on our team, I would like watch them very closely. I know like in principle exactly what they're doing, and I could still not return their serve. And so it's like the thing that I am best at when I'm like really totally dialed in, they could just like make it do things that I can't respond to. Um, Combined with just being good natural athletes and hand-eye coordination, all that stuff.
Crazy. Sounds super interesting. Definitely a world I didn't know much about. So somewhere along the line, table tennis naturally leads into venture capital, as one would expect.
For sure.
Where did you get the VC bug?
So when I was in college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I like attended a bunch of talks. And I like one time I was like doing my homework and I took a break to read this website called Slashdot. And I was like reading articles about like new hard disks and computer companies and stuff like that. And I was just like, wow, this is like really interesting. And I like am taking a break from my normal work to learn about this. Wouldn't it be amazing if like my actual main work, like my job, was to learn about this stuff? And I thought, like, what is the job that has that to like, learn about new technology companies? And VC seemed like the closest thing to that. And there was like exactly one venture capital firm that recruited at my college for people straight out of school. So I applied there and tried real hard and got an interview and an internship and eventually went to work there full time.
Very cool. It's not uncommon in my limited experience that people who have a background in VC often go on to start their own businesses. Maybe that was the plan all along. Maybe it's just from the exposure to, the ecosystem. It's well documented that starting and growing a successful business is fairly challenging. Do you feel that, the exposure to VC and seeing companies and seeing their journey and maybe the mistakes they made along the way, that in ways prepare you to be a founder?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would say it in a couple different ways. Like one, it made me more interested in it just because like for 2 years I spent all day every day trying to, and then sometimes successfully talking to founders of companies. And like my biggest learning from that was I'm a lot more excited about their job than my job. And I wanted to be on the other end of those phone calls. And like even for the people whose like companies weren't setting the world on fire, they was just like the struggle was really interesting. Like their struggles in every job, but I was like really into their struggle. So partially just on an interest front. And then I think it was also really useful just to like talk to a bunch of people and learn what was working, like what the, different kinds of sales models, marketing models, different industries, just like getting a lot of data so that I could sort of like inform my own opinion about what circumstances, what strategies and tactics made sense. And also like in that job, I met my original co-founder from a prior business from RJMetrics, this guy, Bob Moore, who's also an affiliate and now successfully started another company called Crossbeam. So it was useful on that front of just like meeting my eventual co-founder too.
Very cool. I definitely want to talk about common paper, but just to bridge the gap in another way, as someone who's founded multiple companies, RJ Metrics, Stitch, and had them kind of go to acquisition, what was sort of in your practice like the appropriate time in between starting companies? Like, did you kind of dive right into each of them after you got out? Did you feel like I need a 6 month break before I'm ready? Like, how did you kind of like stagger that?
Yeah, so RJ to Stitch, there was effectively zero time in between them because Stitch actually started as the second product at RJ Metrics. And so like when we sold the original RJ Metrics business, as part of that deal, we spun out this second product that was like 1% of our revenue into its own company. And so we already had like a handful of customers for that, and we had a team. So there was like no break in between. And that wasn't like because I thought that was optimal. That was just that was what we had to do. Um, for Stitch to Common Paper, or really Talend to Common Paper, because Talend is a company that bought Stitch, and I'd spent some time at Talend after they bought us. I took a little over 4.5 months off in between those. And during that time, like my wife quit her job, and the two of us, together with our dog, went on a road trip around the United States. Um, I like purposefully like I took like an online photography class. Like I bought a fancy pants camera just like to learn something that I knew nothing about. Um, and I started doing like, sort of some research about common paper. Like it was an idea in the back of my mind. And I talked to some people that I thought I could learn from, and I like spent some time on it. And then eventually towards the tail end of that road trip, we were in Moab, Utah, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world, next to national parks and nature and all this stuff. Um, and I was like doing enough customer development calls for Common Paper that I rented a desk at a co-working facility there. And so instead of like doing all the amazing things you could do in Moab, I was just like all day on Zooms. And my wife was like, "Hey, I think you may have failed out of our sabbatical. And it looks like you want to start working again. We've been on the road for many months. I'm ready to stop too. Why don't we head back to Philly?" So that's what we did. So for me, 4.5 months was the right length of time. I think it was nice also just like observe what I was drawn to. But I'm sure, different people, different situations. I was also super fortunate that we could take, a couple months off, which I realize wasn't an option for me at every point in my career.
Yeah, for sure. Teach their own, but that feels like a very organic way to approach it, and to also know that you were kind of and are committed to common paper. That it was uh, sort of attractive enough to draw you away from this beautiful destination that you were hanging
Yes.
out with.
Right.
So common paper, what is it? Why should it exist? What are you guys up to over there?
Yeah. So it comes out of some frustration that I've had, and what I've learned is like really widespread around B2B companies and primarily software companies dealing with contracts with their customers. And I experienced that at RJ and Stitch and Talend. And I subsequently talked to hundreds and hundreds of people who experienced the same thing, where like the beginning of a relationship between a vendor and a customer ought to be a pretty happy time. Like the customer has self-identified they have a problem, they believe in the vendor solution, and they want to give the vendor money for that solution. And then what happens way too often is that they get in a fight, and they get in a fight over whose contract to use, and then they negotiate with emailed, Word docs and red lines, and it takes forever, and it's expensive, and it's confusing. And then eventually you get the deal signed, and then you actually have to do all the things that you promised to do. And that's like pretty easy when you have two customers or five customers. But if you're fortunate enough to have hundreds or thousands of customers, it's like really challenging to keep track of all the rights you have, all the obligations your customers have, and vice versa. And just like, are you even doing things as straightforward as billing correctly for like the fees and the contracts? And my experience was all like data companies, and there are a lot of questions about our business that we could answer instantly. But when we wanted to know, like, okay, we're going to redo our homepage, who do we have logo approval for? Like, who in the contract does it say, yes, you can use my logo on your website? It took us a week and a half to answer that question because the necessary data for that was spread across hundreds and hundreds of PDFs, all in these different Dropbox folders. Um, and so the problem we're trying to solve at Common Paper is, can we make the process of entering into contracts better, more efficient for both sides? And can we give people access to the data that's in their contracts? And the very big picture vision is that contracts are actually interfaces between companies, and they contain data and they prescribe actions. And because of historical reasons, we're modeling these contracts as digital representations of pieces of paper because that's what contracts used to be. But the much better model for an interface is an API, an application programming interface. That's how we today build interfaces between systems and companies. And so we are trying to turn contracts into APIs. And one way we do that is through standardization. So we create these common templates that tens of thousands of companies use as the base for their contracts. And we also make software for managing those contracts at the level of structured data. I'll pause there because I know that was a lot.
No, for sure. I think that that makes a lot of sense because what you're taking is sort of this decentralized, the way contracts exist in all different formats, and trying to create maybe like a centralized hub that somebody could maybe query, tap into, and just understand what their obligations from. Are you finding there's a particular industry where this is more pressing than others? I mean, you mentioned kind of like B2B, but
Yeah. So the our focus area is really B2B software companies, primarily based in the United States, and primarily those who have at least a decent chunk of their deals where the customer is paying between $10 and $200,000 a year. So that's like the center of the bullseye for us. And we've primarily focused on getting companies when they're very early. So ideally, when they're bringing on board their first customer or design partner or signing their first LOI or NDA. We now have lots of different companies that use the agreements, some very large, some very small, people from all different walks of life, and some people who started small and have grown with us. But that's like when we think about who are we hoping the next one that tries us out, that's the profile.
when you think about like approaching small companies, I imagine some of them maybe aren't always aware they have the problem yet because they haven't scaled to a point where
Mhm.
they've seen kind of the chaos of what you described at some of your previous companies. Does that make the dialogue more difficult, or people have a good intuition as to where things are heading, or maybe they have experience with past companies, they know what to expect?
So it's a really, really astute question. And you're right that some of the problems I described are not on your radar until you have like a lot of traction. There's like, we think about like a sequence of problems and how do we meet people where they are? Because like, they care about the problem they have today. They may intellectually understand that they're going to have other problems later, but they're not focused on solving them. So the entry point we try to get is when someone says, like they get a verbal yes from their first customer. And that customer is like, cool, sounds good. Send me your contract. And then at that point, I know a lot of founders think, oh crap, I need to get a contract. And I ideally want something that's good, that's not going to make me look like I don't know what I'm doing, and that is like appropriate for the deal and the business I'm doing. And I need to like take whatever the off the shelf thing is and customize it the right way because my product does X and not Y. Because this is either paid or unpaid, or they're going to pay me monthly, or they're going to pay me annually, or whatever. So we want that in that moment, the person has like urgently a problem because this is one of the things that's standing between them and closing their first customer or a handful of customers. And then you're exactly right that later they have the problem of how do I get paid? And then after that, they have the problem of, hey, I start hiring a couple people. How do I enable them to do contracts, mostly self-serve, but within guardrails? And then later on, they have the problem of, well, now I have hundreds of contracts. I need to understand what's in them. So it's like different problems, and like you can sort of start with the tiny bit of our solution and sort of grow over time as your problem set grows because you're hopefully successful.
Very cool. Is it on your radar, sort of more like service-based companies? I mean, as someone who runs an agency, I guess I think of contracts as more the norm. I had a software company in the past, and maybe because it was an enterprise software, I'm just like not exposed to the level of what you're talking about. But I always felt like it was sufficient just to have like a terms of service, and we were kind of good to go. So, I'm actually surprised, a little bit surprised that software turned out to be the target market that you guys are looking at.
Yeah. And so sometimes for some deals, it tends to be lower price point things where you can just post your online terms of service and have people agree to that. And we have a generator to help people create those terms of service. So if that's all you need, great, you can use those for that. And what often happens is, and this is how our business works, where you can just sign up for the product. You can sign up actually for free and use our product. And then once you start to need more stuff, you may convert to a paid thing and we start at like $25 a month, $50 a month, $100 a month, depending on what you need. And that's all under our standard terms of service and it's click through. And then if you're a bigger customer and you're paying us more and there's maybe some custom things in your deal, then often you need like a one-to-one contract that is more like custom negotiated terms. And maybe like they just say like, we find the terms of your standard TOS unacceptable. We need a higher liability cap, or we need, whatever your standard thing is, we need to change that. And that's when you have a one-to-one agreement. And we have a lot of people who use like TOS for the masses and then, one-to-one contracts for the smaller number of higher value deals. The other part of your question for professional services. So we do have a professional services agreement that has a SOW, a statement of work associated with it. That is like, we actually got asked for that a lot by our software customers because they are like, sometimes they have services engagements, sometimes exactly. Like that, yeah. And then also sometimes they are the customer where they are working with agencies and whatnot. And so we now have some pure play services agency firms that use us just for the PSA. And that's a lot of how we've grown over time has been like, we start with a really narrow niche. Those people like have some adjacent needs and we help them out. And then when we add those things for their adjacency, that opens up a new market. So when we started, actually, we were just cloud software, so just hosted. And then some of our cloud customers are like, hey, we actually sometimes sell our product as an on-prem version. We really need a separate contract for those on-prem deals. And so we created that. And now we have pure play on-prem companies. That's all they do. So that's how we think about, expanding our addressable market over time.
Fascinating stuff. Making the world of contracts interesting. Jake, appreciate your time today. For people that want to learn more about you, Common Paper, how should they do so?
So we're just commonpaper.com. The social network I spend the most time on is probably LinkedIn. So you can find me there. I'm just Jake Stein. But yeah, appreciate it. This was fun.
Thank you.
That's all for today's episode of Philly Tech Connect. Join our community at phillytechentrepreneurs.com. Special thanks to our sponsor, Shortlist.io, a digital marketing agency specializing in top-notch link building, content strategy, and web design. Stay innovative, Philly, and see you next time on Philly Tech Connect.